Let's talk about why you didn't get into Y Combinator. By the time this video comes out, the deadline for YC applications will have passed. And there are a lot of videos out there on how to get into Y Combinator. I wanted to make a video about what happens if you didn't get into Y Combinator, breaking down maybe the reasons why and what you should do about it. I did not go to Y Combinator, even though they did invite me. They gave me some fantastic feedback. But before I could go back to Y Combinator, I got an offer to buy my company and ended up selling it before I even had to go. As a 7-time funded founder with 2 exits and the chief strategy officer of startups.com, I have advised over 600 startups, and many of them have either applied to Y Combinator, some of them had gone through Y Combinator, and a lot of them try to get to Y Combinator, don't get in, or get the interview. I've seen enough, especially analyzing all the companies that present at Demo Day, and I have a pretty good idea by this time which companies are going to get into Y Combinator, do well at Y Combinator, or not get accepted to go to Y Combinator in the first place. And although it doesn't feel good not to get into Y Combinator, to get that rejection, which I have for my startups multiple times, it's what you do with the rejection, how you break it down, and you move forward that's going to be most important. Personally, I've used rejections from Y Combinator as learning opportunities, and all my startups have gotten better and better because every time I've been rejected from Y Combinator, I get to go and analyze and ask myself why, and I ask other founders why, and I compare myself to the other founders that have gone through, and I think to myself, if I was them or they came and they were a co-founder in my startup, what would have they done? To begin this process, you have to look at Y Combinator's investment thesis. And many founders overlook this, but it's right there in black and white. If you look at Y Combinator, and they have 3 tenets. The first is make something people want. 2 is do things that don't scale, and 3, talk to users. They're pretty much tipping their hand, they're telegraphing their investment thesis on what it takes to get into Y Combinator, and so many founders don't even do these 3 things before applying. Make something people want is pretty straightforward. If you don't have market validation, if you don't have traction, that means people don't want what you're building. They're going to ask you, how do you know people want this? And if it's in your head, or if you say, oh, my rich uncle or my mom told me that this is going to be a fantastic idea, all my best buddies at the bowling league or in my office party, they think it's a great idea, that is not enough. They want to see strangers actually want your product. The second is do things that don't scale. And that is all about what are the things that you can do better because you're a one-man show or you're a few co-founders together versus these big companies that are already funded and have to make certain amounts of money, protect their share price, and work for the investors. Maybe they've gotten so big that they cannot afford to pivot or do things that you can do as a scrappy little startup because it just doesn't work for their business model, and they don't have the resources or even the management to do so. Maybe they don't want to take a risk, and that's a major consideration for these big incumbent companies because YC wants to invest in those formidable founders that can figure out those gaps, those little cracks in the armor, and get in there and exploit it and start to cause some waves and eventually go and either create a completely new category or disrupt all the incumbents, the competition out there. For example, doing things that don't scale comes down to founder-led sales. Hand-to-hand combat in the trenches sales. Customer service is another one. Can you provide exceptional customer service because you're in front of your user? You can actually service them yourself. Big companies can't afford to give one-on-one customer service with the top people. Jeff Bezos tried to do this for the longest time. You could actually email Jeff Bezos when he was the CEO of Amazon, and then he would go figure it out. But other companies, you're not going to go email Elon Musk. You might be able to tweet him or X him or whatever it's called these days, but it's not going to be a customer service issue that he's going to take care of. YC wants to see that you have done things that do not scale, and that way you get right in front and you do the third tenet, which is all about talking to users. Y Combinator is going to grill you and ask you how you talk to users, what they've said, what you've learned, because going all the way back to the beginning, that's how you know you've made something people want. And the partners tell you this all the time. You should be doing only 2 things. You should be shipping product and you should be talking to users to get them to use your product. So if you're a founder out there and you've not done those 3 things to begin with, well, that's where you need to go. You need to get back to the drawing board and figure out, okay, how do I know what I've made is something people want? How do I do things that don't scale? And how am I talking to users? What does that system look like? Get back to work, and you'll be fine because you're eventually going to get there just doing those 3 things. That's the amazing secret about YC is it's so simple. You just have to consistently do those 3 things and you will get there. Trust me, I know. I've seen founders do it. Now let's get into some of the other reasons why you might not have been accepted in a Y Combinator. First is your idea didn't make sense. And I've seen some Y Combinator applications from founders, and it doesn't make sense. I look at pitch decks every day. They're sent to me by all of you out there as my YouTube subscribers. And so many times I say, this doesn't make sense. I cannot understand what your startup actually does. And the reason you got there is you didn't do these 3 things. You didn't make something people wanted. You didn't go do things that don't scale, and you didn't talk to users. That's the reason your idea doesn't make sense, because it might make sense in your own mind, but that's inside language. You are living in your own bubble, this echo chamber. And you might have some people who just say, yes, that makes sense, because they're in your mind. They understand your language, but the regular YC partner, as well as the investor and the users out there, they don't understand what your business is. You have to be able to hone it down. Go through idea validation, customer discovery, do a lot of pitches even before you build the product, and ask people, does this make sense? The second reason you might not get into Y Combinator is your idea is not big enough. You have to understand Y Combinator, they are looking for unicorn companies. And if your market is just not big enough, you're not solving a problem that's big enough to become a unicorn company, you'd be the best company in the world. You'd be the best founder in the world with the best product in the world. They're still not going to invest. Look at the companies that they've invested in and look at the trends or the call for startups that they're putting out there. They're looking for AI startups out there right now. They're looking for solutions to cancer, massive billion-dollar ideas. Look at all their successes. Airbnb, Instacart, Stripe, Dropbox, just to name a few. Those are billion-dollar companies. And you need that because how their fund is structured is they need mega winners because they make so many bets on 90% of the companies that will not make it. And only 2 or 3% of companies become these unicorns. They need those unicorns to give returns to their investors and to keep that whole YC machine going. So if you have a market and it's way too small, you're not going to be in contention to get a Y Combinator. And how do you figure this out? This is where a bottom-up market analysis is important. You need to look at your TAM, SAM, SOM. And if you don't know what that is, go look it up. And if you don't know the difference between bottom-up and top-down, go look it up. I see this every day. It's the most common mistake. They come to me and they say, cybersecurity is $1 trillion industry. This is how much everybody spends on sports in the world. That's not your total addressable market. Do yourself a big favor. Learn how to do a bottom-up market analysis because investors are going to ask. Forget a Y Combinator. You're going to be pitching other investors. And if the investors are professional in any sense of the word, they're going to ask about your market. And you better be prepared to show your math and defend your assumptions. These are in no particular order. But the third is you can't build your product. If you listen to the leaders at Y Combinator, such as Sam Altman, Gary Tan, Michael Seibel, you see that they have a proclivity. They prefer founders that are technical or teams that are made with founders that are at least technical enough to build their own product. If you can't build your own product, think about it for a second. What is the investor going to think? What does YC think? You have to outsource it to a dev shop, and they're going to charge you lots of money, and you're not going to be responsible with your runway. On top of which, there's a massive liability. What happens if that dev shop or that freelancer holds your program hostage? They hold you over the barrel. They're actually holding your code hostage and saying, given to my demands, which is going to screw up your cap table, your runway, all that stuff, and prevent you from going to actual institutional investors like Y Combinator. So what do you do if you can't build your product? You got 2 options: learn or bring on a technical co-founder. I've seen some people with really, really low code skills get into Y Combinator, and that's absolutely fantastic. But second, they're going to be expecting you, if you're not technical, to be able to bring on technical people. And if you can't bring on a CTO, inspire that CTO because you're making something people want, you're doing things that don't scale, and you're talking to users, then you won't be able to scale your team to get to that point where you are 300, 3,000 people, and you are doing hundreds of millions of dollars a year. If you can't even get out of the gate with technical people, well, the chances of you doing that later on are basically pretty slim. That's what I'm saying. I advise the founder who is non-technical, and what ended up happening is that Y Combinator would not allow this founder in unless they were absolutely sure that they could secure the freelancer that was willing to become a CTO if they got in Y Combinator. And they paused the interview and they said, we need to get this potential technical founder on the phone and make sure that they are the right fit and they're willing to come into the program and they're going to make that commitment. That ended up happening, and this founder and new co-founder went through Y Combinator. The fourth reason might be your team lacks founder market fit. There's a reason Y Combinator asks you what your team chemistry is, what you've built outside of the startup together, And what are some of the amazing things that you've done? Did you win a Nobel Prize? Are you an Olympic gold athlete? What systems have you hacked? Those are questions that I was asked anyway in my application. I'm not too sure what the application looks like today. But if you can't show domain expertise, you can't show that you have a unique insight, you know something that other competitors don't know, you're not going to get into Y Combinator. This happens when a founder picks a problem to solve that is so far out their domain expertise. They may have passion for it and they may care about it tremendously, but they just don't have the domain expertise. They don't understand the market well enough to actually be the founder that can be trusted with a large sum of money to go pull that off, because it's so hard to do. And there's a real easy way to assess founder market fit. If you look at your resume and you don't have bullet points of things that you've accomplished in the industry or that you worked on the problem before doing your startup in a meaningful way, then you don't have founder market fit. The only other way around that is to bring on a team with founder market fit, but that makes it very, very difficult, or demonstrate to investors and YC how you went and figured out founder market fit. You just obsessively researched the problem, and now you're actually a thought leader and an expert, which means you have founder market fit. The fifth reason is you don't have enough traction, or your traction will not scale. I have personal experience with this. This is the reason my one company that I went and got the interview didn't get the initial acceptance. I had plenty of traction. In fact, cool story, it was Sam Altman that contacted me in my application and said, send me your growth graph. I think I was growing something ridiculous, like 60% week over week. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was really fast growth. And Sam, who I think was president at the time, just wanted me to confirm, and I sent him my legitimate growth graph right out of Excel, and it kind of looked like this instead of this nice hockey stick growth graph, and I'm pretty sure he knew this was legitimate revenue, which it was. Now let me touch on traction just for a moment. I see a lot of founders out in the public forums and comments get salty because they're like, oh, Y Combinator only invests if I got $1 million in ARR. That's not the case. I've seen founders get in and they've got no revenue whatsoever because they're ticking the other boxes. But if you want a differentiator that sets you apart, traction is going to be it. Now, in my case, they said, all right, we appreciate that you're growing this fast, but you're not going to get to that $1 billion valuation using your sales tactics. And they told me, we don't like your sales channels. You're using salespeople. People do not scale. And they gave me this fantastic idea. I talk about it all the time. They said, if you can figure out how to get companies to onboard themselves and automate the sales process, the lead acquisition, then you're in. And we figured it out. It was amazing, which is why I'll always be appreciative of Y Combinator. I'm kind of a fanboy. I have a special place in my heart for Y Combinator. I learned so much. How do you go get traction? I'm going to go back like a broken record, make something people want, do things that don't scale, and talk to users. And my other piece of advice is something I learned from Y Combinator a while ago. They said, put a sticky on your laptop and put 10% week over week. Pretty much how I run everything when I'm trying to go after traction. I put on a sticky and I say, what levers do I need to pull to increase one of these metrics for 10% week over week to show traction? Sometimes I'll take a spreadsheet and I'll say, okay, here's my starting baseline metric. If I times it by 110%, a 10% week over week growth, what do I need to see on my dashboard for results every single week? And if I don't hit those results, I ask myself, why? What didn't I do? What needs to change? And if I do, I say, what worked and how do I double down on this to continue 10% week over week, which is what is going to give you that hockey stick growth graph. So go out there and get that traction by the time you're going to apply for Y Combinator next. And the last one is you botched your application, including your video. In all my rejections, I appreciate Y Combinator saying we could have gotten this wrong. We get it wrong all the time because the application is just not clear. Maybe you put in too much buzzy words, marketing slang, or you put walls and paragraphs of text in your application that people aren't going to read. Or maybe your video was scripted, you didn't do it authentically, and they couldn't really get a read on whether you were the type of founder that they want to invest in. They want to invest in real people. You watch some of these videos out there, these people are total nerds, founders, geeks, and the way they engage with each other and the chemistry that they have. Believe me, I helped a group of total nerdy nerds, academics, get an interview at Y Combinator, and their video was terrible from an entertainment standpoint. It's not a TED Talk. It's not an entertaining Mr. Beast video. It was a Y Combinator application. So boring, so straightforward, but so good. How you fix your application is you get other sets of eyes on it. What I do in my application is I write it all out, and I just barf all over the application, and I write everything on my mind. And then I cut it down by half, and then I cut it down by half again, and then I get somebody to read it and say, Does it make sense? And then I cut it in half again to the point where I'm paraphrasing and I'm not using actual grammar correct sentences. I use as many bullet points as I possibly can, but I keep it tight and short, the same way that if I'd be presenting to an investor. I saw a pitch competition the other day and they had 2 minutes. I usually give founders 6 minutes to pitch if I'm going to be spending half an hour with them. That's literally how I treat my application. I don't expect someone to read a complete novel. I expect them to skim it first and then say, okay, let's dive a little deeper, or maybe pass it along to somebody else and say, are you seeing what I'm seeing? And then they put some people on it just to read it. And then they have this process where it eventually gets to partners and decide who's going to be invited for an interview at scale. So if you're worried about botching your application, there are a lot of references and resources out there. But if you've done everything up to this point in time, all my other lists, your application is just an exercise. You have all the goods. It's just figuring out how to write it in a clear fashion. There's a list. Let me know what you think. If you've had experience with Y Combinator or you're working through these things, I'd love to know what your thoughts are, and I'd love to hear your stories. Leave a comment, and if you appreciate this type of content while you're there, I'd love a like and subscribe. That'd be great. This is it for now. I'll see you in the next video.